Hello, everyone. Welcome back from lunch. We have an exciting panel to re-energize your afternoon. Joining us is Aditya Ghosh, a prominent business leader who has made significant strides in aviation and hospitality. Aditya was the former president of Indigo, where he led the airline to tremendous success. He co-founded Akasa Air, India's newest airline, and has held key roles at OYO and Fab India. With a law degree from Delhi University, Aditya's career is a testament to his dynamic leadership and innovative spirit. Moderating today's discussion is Dr. Radhika Khosla, Associate Professor at the University of Oxford. As an expert in sustainable development, Radhika leads critical research on zero-carbon energy and climate change governance. Her work focuses on how societies can improve well-being while protecting the environment, making her a key voice in the global sustainability dialogue. Please join me in welcoming Aditya Ghosh and our moderator, Dr. Radhika Khosla.
We'll just keep it empty. Great. Well, thank you all for being here. Thank you for coming post-lunch. And I'm so pleased to have a chance to talk with Aditya on a stage. We've not had that before. So this session is about sustainability. It's about aviation. And, you know,
last time was at a Diwali party, so slightly different.
So yeah, we didn't talk about aviation or sustainability. So it's good to catch up. So, you know, we're talking about India, we're talking about sustainability, and it's every time we talk about, or I teach about India, there's this particular duality that we have to always grapple with when we think about climate change and the country, which is that India is one of the largest annual emitters of greenhouse gases, but it has one of the lowest per capita greenhouse gas emissions, right? And it's this really interesting, unique trajectory of growth. But we're looking at a future where we need more energy, where we have much higher consumption, and we need to do it with fewer emissions. And we've never had that situation before. We've had more consumption with more emissions. And you know, in that world of more emissions and more consumption, aviation is particularly interesting because the way in which we have engaged with aviation, even as a country, has changed dramatically, in large part to do with Indigo, actually. So at the moment, aviation is about 2% of global greenhouse gases, of carbon emissions, actually. And if we include other polluting gases around aviation, it's about 3% of greenhouse gases. And one way to mitigate that is this idea of sustainable aviation fuels. So sustainable aviation fuels are very much seen as a pathway to get the aviation industry to become more sustainable. And you know, the way that we think about sustainable aviation fuels is that basically they would replace kerosene, and they're either made of biofuels or synthetic materials. So perhaps, you know, within that kind of context of where we are with this sustainable aviation fuels debate, which sound great and promising, but at the same time, they're about 0.2% of global jet supply. So that's very, very low. Within that context, Akasa Airlines wants to be the most green airline in India, and it has this wonderfully ambitious goal. So tell us a little bit about it. Tell us about the dream, but also the reality of how we get from 0.02% globally to actually making it India's most green airline.
Thank you, Radhika. Look, I mean, at Akasa, we have this kind of audacious dream. I don't even know if it's a goal, because, so what I mean by that is, this is a different company, but I'll tell you about this company as well, called the E-Plane Company. But essentially at Akasa, we've got this kind of ambition that we want to be the greenest airline in the world at some day. And this is a long journey. Talking about sustainable aviation fuel, the biggest issue right now is there's just not enough. There's not enough supply of SAF. And therefore, there is also a huge cost that comes with it. We have this goal in India that we want to get 100 million customers flying on 10% blended SAF by 2030. That in itself is going to cost about $340 million more than just on ticket prices from what the actual prices are. Plus, there is this whole issue of where will we get enough fuel, enough SAF, without impacting food security and change in crop patterns and so on and so forth. Yeah. So we've got a really this challenge going on. And before that, Radhika, I'll double down and I'll agree with you. We've got this very strange situation where we are such a aircraft underpenetrated market, right? That there will be rise in air transportation. Yeah. That absolutely will mean there will be no more energy consumption.
Yeah. Sorry, can I just ask what's the kind of projection you see for aircraft consumption rise, and also just how that's changed, say, pre-Indigo and post?
Yeah. So when I signed on that 100 aircraft order, the first 100 aircraft order for Indigo back in 2005, the entire Indian aviation industry had about 110 airplanes, right? Today, India has about, give or take, 600 airplanes in the country, right? And we have more than 1,000 airplanes on order, right? But it still is one of the most underpenetrated aircraft markets in the world, right? So even in absolute terms, we are going to see double or triple the number of airplanes in the country over the next 10 to 15 years. But even that, I think, will not be enough to make air travel affordable and democratized, right? And then there is this other thing. When you look at that, today aviation in India contributes to about 1%. Globally, it's about 2%, 2 to 3%, depending on how you look at it. In India, it's about 1%. But as ground transportation becomes more and more electric and zero emission, and air transportation is not going to be able to, get to that point, as a percentage, actually, we are going to look even worse.
Correct.
In the next 30 years, right? Yeah. So I kind of see this as a journey where realistically I feel SAF is some distance away. We'll start doing blended. Fortunately, maybe some of you already know this, but the use of sustainable aviation fuel, the good news is that does not require any aircraft modification. We don't require any modification to our airplanes to start using SAF. So thank God for that, at least. Yeah. Right? But before that, I think there are several other things that can happen. So, these engines that you're seeing on the screen, which Akasa uses, these actually already burn 20% less fuel than the comparable, comparable engines on some of the other airplanes that we would use. The winglets that you see on the side, those things that are sticking out at the end, it again means that we are able to create better lift, more efficient lift, and therefore we are able to, again, save fuel. But then there are other things that we are beginning to do. For example, direct routing, right? So when you go from, let's say you're flying from Delhi to Bangalore, it doesn't go like, a straight line. You're going over various points, and it's a zigzag, depending on which waypoint you're going after. Now, using what we call RNAV, better navigation systems, we're able to get more and more direct routings, right? So that basically means that we are able to save more fuel. The kind of flap settings that we use when we come into land, right, reduces the amount of fuel that we are burning. Some of these things are a little bit more common. something called a single engine taxi out. So instead of single engine taxi out, single engine taxi in. So when we are pushing the aircraft out or pulling the aircraft in, we will shut off one engine so that we are able to conserve fuel there. And then there are things which, for example, you saw those orange-colored uniforms. There was a picture of the flight attendants wearing orange-colored uniform, orange and gray. That uniform is basically made out of recycled marine plastic waste, right? The soles on the shoes are recycled rubber. Now, is that going to save the world? No. But having said that, I think these are ways that you can start creating a culture that in Akasa we call it a green tarmac. Can we create a green tarmac for the future? Or for that matter, you might have seen in the aviation world, there's this old tradition of doing this water cannon salute, right? When a new airplane comes in or you start a new route, you come in and there are these two fire tenders, pushing water through, and it's like an umbrella of water. We don't do that. We've saved 360,000 liters of water just in the last 1 year by not doing water cannon salutes, for example.
Right. Yeah.
So I think it's a combination of culture, small steps that we can take straight away, right? Whether it's the uniform or the shoes or the sustainable paper that we use for our packaging and so on and so forth, the ink that we use on our packaging and so on and so forth, to bigger things like SAF. India, I think, has the potential of being a big SAF producer. We create about 180 million tons of feedstock that can be used for producing SAF.
Can I just ask on that? So in the EU, the target is 2% SAF by 2025, and I think it's 70% by 2050. So even for the EU, it's still 70% by 2050. Where, do we have any targets in India around that, or do you have targets for Akasa around that?
Yeah, so I think let's look at it in three different ways. In Akasa, our target is just to continuously improve on the total amount of fuel that we are burning per ASK, per available seat kilometer. Yeah. That should be a combination of a total amount of aviation turbine fuel. So that is a combination of, like I said, kind of fuel we are burning, how we are burning that fuel, kind of engines and technology we're using, and the operational stability, operational procedures that we use. So that's one. The second way to look at it is that I think, like I said, in India, we've now got a target that by 2030, which is not a long time away, right? It's only about 1,800 days away. Yeah. We want to get to 100 million customers flying with 10% blend, right? Just to put it in perspective, India carries about, give or take, about 200 million customers a year. So 100 million customers flying on 10% blend is not a small target. It's a pretty ambitious target.
And are you using chemical-based SAF or biofuel-based SAF?
Right now it's biofuel, right?
But I want to ask you about that. Yeah, so maybe we can explain that a little bit to the audience, right?
You see, synthetic, is where we need to go, because, it's pretty obvious. Just imagine that if farmers suddenly realized around the world that there is this really cool, lucrative, money-making, thing of growing, jatropha and various other types of feedstock that can get to aviation fuel, which will be much more of a cash crop. They'll suddenly stop producing food, right? And which can create massive imbalance in the world. So therefore, I think while on one side we're trying to solve for SAF, on the other side we've got to kind of keep in mind much larger issues that impact all of us. But also, I was saying that I'm going to talk about this other company that you saw, right?
Tell us about it.
Yeah. So I feel that, when we think about aviation, we immediately start thinking about long-haul passenger airlines, right? I feel that the journey is going to be more a bunch of $1 billion $1 ideas. And some of them will come from smaller aircraft moving to electric or some kind of a hybrid. People are beginning to get excited about hydrogen, for instance. So E-Plane, the company that you saw that little prototype flying just a short while back. E-Plane is the world's most compact long-range electric airplane that is being built, right? So sitting in the West, actually Pranav is an early investor. Yeah, Pranav is an early investor. Thank you. All these other companies that you think that you might have heard of, Archer, Joby, etc., either they are very large footprint, 15-meter wingspan, right? 15-meter wingspan, if you need to land it somewhere and take off somewhere, you need helipads all over the place, right? So that then limits the kind of real urban mobility that one wants to achieve. The second is they are either very slow speed and long range, or they're very high speed and short range, right? E-Plane is the only aircraft, vertical eVTOL aircraft that is being developed, which is in a 5-meter wingspan, long range, slow speed, so therefore it can do multi-hop and fast charging. So it'll be piloted, 2 people. It just literally takes off. So 5 meters, it can land on top of buildings. It can land on top of what are called vertiports, right? And you can imagine very congested cities in India, in Bangladesh, in Indonesia, and all over the place, right? Or even Los Angeles or anywhere, right? You can have literally hundreds of them flying around, right?
And has it been piloted yet?
It's in the subscale prototype stage right now, going through its design certifications, etc. Right. We should have a scaled prototype ready by end of next year, with production in about another couple of years later. Okay. And then all these so-called what we call private jets, right? I mean, colloquially, many of them will become electric. So I think before we get to passenger airlines, some of this sort of zero emission, more sustainable methods will begin to solve.
Yeah,
right?
No, that's interesting. Tell me something.
Sorry, Radhika, I interrupted you. The other bit where a lot of rapid, development will happen will be on logistics, on cargo. Electric drones. Cargo movement. 50 kg, 100 kg, 200 kg movements, right? That will happen much faster. Mr. Sinha was there, I think earlier. Jayant was definitely instrumental in the drone policy. So in India, another one that's happening is crop spraying with these drones and these with these sort of vehicles. In India, up to 500 kgs. These vehicles are certified as drones. In the EU, if I'm not mistaken, it is about 100 kilos. The moment they go beyond 100 kilos, then they are in that aircraft category, which basically means it's a much longer, complex this thing. And that's why no wonder you're not being able to see as much rapid development as we are seeing in India. I'm sure you have to watch the 4 o'clock session with Mr. Pai, okay? And have a pen ready. The kind of statistics he will give you, you will be blown away with what's happening in India and how rapidly it's happening. Sorry, I interrupted you a couple of times.
That's really interesting, and I'm going to ask a last question and then turn it to the audience. So there are 2 questions actually, but one is, what happens to the frames of aircrafts, right? Like these. It's a piece of infrastructure in some sense. We use it for a few decades. What happens to that? And given that there's probably not a great story to tell around that, we're going to be, how do we get to a zero emissions aviation future? And is there a role of CDR, of carbon dioxide removal, within that?
Look, absolutely. Can I address that question, because that's the last question? Can I address that question both for aircraft as well as for ground transportation?
Yeah, sure.
Right? So let me start off with aircraft. What happens is there is a inbuilt incentive and a mechanism in countries like India to have the very latest technology, the very latest aerodynamics and so on and so forth, because our fuel prices are just so high. Where fuel prices are so high, entrepreneurs then look at various ways to try to reduce it. So therefore, we are constantly looking for better wing design and so on and so forth. I think most of us in the aviation business feel that the next big leap in fuel saving or less carbon emission, less noise will come less from engines, but will now begin to start coming from wing design, etc. Right? Even in the electric airplane, in E-plane, we are using the synergistic wing design, which then helps us with better lift and less energy consumption. So now, when you look at countries or regions of the world where fuel is not as expensive, no wonder you see these airplanes running around for 30, 40 years.
Right.
And I think there has to be some market mechanism or some regulatory mechanism to say, you know what, just because fuel is less expensive here and you can afford to keep burning it, you're going to keep using these planes for the next 30, 40, 50 years, at least 30 to 40 years. I think there has to be some regulatory disincentive to do that, right? Because in a place like India, we have an incentive to actually, like Indigo or even at Akasa, we flush out our planes every 6 to 9 years, right? So we just don't use older airplanes.
And what happens to them?
They just will then be leased out to some other airline, probably in some other part of the world, right? Because it helps us in fuel savings, it helps us in maintenance cost, and so on and so forth, right? Now, similarly, for example, in ground transportation, right? You saw this video of this bus company, Nugo. We have the mayor of Surat, I think, here today participating. I definitely met him at lunch. So we, in this company called Green Cell Mobility, we operate 1,100 all-electric buses in India, right? And when I say that, many people think, oh yeah, that must be then Delhi, Bombay. No, it is not. We have 700 buses flying in rural UP. We have 150 buses flying in rural or tier 2, tier 3 Maharashtra. We have about 100 or 150 buses flying in Surat, right? All electric, right? Yeah. And by the way, for every kilometer that you operate an electric bus, you save 1 kg of emission, right? So we got incorporated only in 2019, right? We've already saved 132 million tons of emission, right? So, and the same thing applies there, right? If you begin to change from IC engines to electric, you will begin to see better emission standards. You will begin to see better maintenance costs. You will begin to see a whole bunch of other benefits that come out of it. And interestingly, and then that's the last thing I'll say before we open it up for the audience questions. We did a survey, right? There was McKinsey did a survey in 2016 where out of the 7 countries that they surveyed, India had the most number of people who said they would like to go electric for ground transportation, which was 50%. We did a survey ourselves with Frost & Sullivan last year in 2023. In India, 75% of respondents said we want to move electric, even if it means paying slightly more, right? Wow. And the average age 46% of our traffic is less than 29 years old, right? 31% of our traffic is women, right? So this whole, the choice architecture, is, I think, gives me a lot of hope.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many different strands to pick up on. I wish we had time. Okay, can I just have a show of hands? And I think the way I want to do this is do 3 questions at a time, because we have a big timer clicking in front of me that says we have about 5 minutes left. So 1, 2, and 3, and then we'll do one more. Yeah. Is that okay? Just to do 3
yes,
at a time?
Yes, of course.
Hi, Hi, Aditya. Love to hear the numbers and the vision. I was very intrigued by looking at the slide about the food, world cuisine and inclusive food in Akasa Airlines. I just wanted to know your take on the carbon footprint of airline meals and how Akasa Airlines is thinking about navigating that.
Yeah. Oh,
Thank
what's
you.
your name?
Jaggushani. I'm a DPhil in medical history here.
Jaggushani?
Jaggushani.
Jakushini. Okay. I'll find out what it means. In
Yeah.
just a bit.
Sure. Yeah, thank you.
Wait, no, you can't answer. We're going to do 3.
Thank you so much for the talk, first of all. I'm Manan and I'm a student of economics. Hence, I ask, how would, as Akasa's motto is, right, a low-cost airline so that it's accessible for everybody in India, how would you balance the economic viability of using a fuel like SAF that could be more expensive, and also would you have a supply set in place for the SAF to be supplied to, say, Akasa? Because if there are disruptions in that, you can expect big disruptions overall in the services. Thank you.
And I think it was you, right? Yeah.
Hi, my name is Sia. I'm a rising senior at the University of Michigan. And my question is about, I was looking up a bit about your profile, and you have a very, entrepreneurial, trajectory. And I was wondering if you had any, if you found any, differences working within, the private versus public sector, specifically within the context of how entrepreneurship plays out, how easy, with regulations and funding and things like that. So what were the key differences you saw, and which one was easy, pros and cons of each of those two sectors?
So on the the meals in any airline leads to very high wastage, higher fuel burn because you're carrying a lot of food and catering around, and you're also spending a lot on just cooling things down and so on and so forth. So the way we look at it is, we now kind of use technology to try to predict the amount of water we are going to use on every flight, including potable water, the kind of food, and so on and so forth. And one of the big things that we've done is, big for us, is that even though ancillary revenues is a big part of an airline's revenue, we have designed our interface in a way that we encourage more and more people to do bookings in advance, right? So that then that leads to less wastage, that leads to less carrying, and so on and so forth. The second is we try to optimize because we try to see the amount of weight we are carrying, we try to optimize where we are going to pick up, catering supplies from, rather than picking it up from one place and start moving it around 4 or 5 sectors, right? So and by the way, not only we do it, Emirates also does this. They are also thinking about it on those lines. And the third is that, how do you move away from perishables as much as possible, right? In Indigo, we started that rehydrated food a long time back. In Akasa, we're kind of pushing that this thing. So yeah, so that's the way. And then, of course, I don't know if you've seen our menu. A lot of our food is actually grown sustainably. A lot of our food is, super grains like millet, etc., etc. So I think that's kind of how we are, beginning to solve for it at the moment. Right? On the question of, SAF and supply, look, the very first thing is, and, my brother, who Radhika knows, Oxford graduate, Oxford PhD, he runs this thing called CEW. So Arnaba often says, right, that the big changes in climate, right, big changes in climate tech and how we look at climate will come from when consumers and voters begin to demand it, right? So there is only so much that we can do to push, but it'll be great if our consumers start demanding, a greener path from all airlines. And that serves us really well because it kind of so aligns with what we're trying to do. Because, by the way, it's not as expensive as we think. For a greener flight, what you have to pay is the equivalent of one extra sandwich or one extra Coke, right, or soda. So are consumers willing to pay that, whatever, 200 rupees or 300 rupees on a flight to say, you know what, this is going to make sure that my children actually don't have to deal with 52 degrees or 50 degrees or 48 degrees. Or Gulmarg does not have any snow for the first time. So many of you who've grown up in India, I mean, I'm sure each one of you and your families are experiencing dramatic climate changes, right? So I think consumers have to begin to demand it. I think people like us are ready to serve that consumer choice. And on the last question, in summary, what I've seen is that when we're dealing with the so-called private sector, impact is less, speed is higher. When you're dealing with the government sector, typically speed is slower, impact is higher, right? Now, which one is easier or difficult is where your heart and mind is aligned, where you see your true purpose. For me, impact is always something that has given me the reason to wake up in the morning and come to work. And so if some of those things just take a little bit longer, but structurally can make a difference for the long term, I'll take that battle on any day. So that's.
I'm trying to look for an organizer to ask if we can carry on, or do we need to stop? Because we have a blinking red light in front of us.
Till the organizers don't interrupt us.
But if they don't interrupt us. But maybe we should be respectful. I don't know.
Okay. Yeah. Great.
One more question. Okay. I'm going to let you pick.
Oh.
Yeah.
I think you raised your hand first. Yeah. So.
Thank you so much. Hi, my name is Sushant, and I'm a lawyer by profession and a student union president at SOAS University of London. So my question is that your work is also, how do I say that your work and your initiatives are already a contribution in the society with respect to sustainable development and the climate? But one thing, as you mentioned, that I come from a UP, and as you mentioned that your pilot projects those things are going on in the rural areas. So that who are the consumers for your business? For example, what I'm trying to understand is, one is, it is more cost benefiting for the existing consumers, and the second thing, for example, even if we are doing in the rural areas, are the consumer going to be the same, or we are also making a platform where the people could not afford it, or people could not even think about it, because how see your airline or your ideas is the society, the changing the society. Like people could not afford a flight and they're thinking about taking the flight. So even if your projects are going to be implemented in the rural areas, are we also uplifting the people to become a consumer? Thank you.
Mr. Pai के सामने आप मेरे इतना कह रहे हो ना कि you're like big change agent, मतलब he's my guru, right? So very embarrassing for me to talk about these things. But look, let's take the buses in UP as an example. 700 buses running in rural areas, right? All women, bus conductors, drivers, people from the transgender community on the buses. 1/3 of the travelers in those buses is women. 46% of the travelers are under the age of 29. They are coming from small towns of UP. And they are paying. And by the way, this is a myth that it's going to cost more. At least electric buses की आप बात कर रहे हैं अगर, every 100 kilometers, it is 26 to 30% cheaper to run those buses versus IC engines after taking total cost of operation, which means total cost of ownership, which means the upfront higher capex and the operating expense put together, it is still cheaper. E-plane, our target is to fly a distance of 30 kilometers for 1,500 rupees, right? Which is 1.5x or 1.2 to 1.5x an Uber ride. Chaliye, मान लीजिए that math is wrong. Make it 2x an Uber ride. It is nothing like 10x the Uber ride that some of these American and European companies are this thing. So therefore, I think in India we are being able to, and I'm deeply respectful of all the innovation that's happening around the world. But I think we have found a way many times to solve the same problem at a fraction of a cost. अब E-plane की बात सोच लीजिए, like some of the other competitors have raised anywhere between $500 million to over $2 billion. We have raised not even 1/10 of that, right? And we are the first global company to get a DOA, a design approval to begin to work on it, right? So I think, just like it's happened in space and satellite, you will see this happening in transportation also.
Thank you. Thanks,
Thank you.
Aditya. Thank you all.